Auven.
Late on Sunday, August 10, 2025, outside the main gate of al-Shifa hospital in Gaza City, a group of journalists sits inside a tent. The sky over the city is flashing orange. One of them has posted minutes earlier about heavy bombardment. Then the tent is hit. The journalist's name is al-Sharif. He is 28 years old. He works for Al Jazeera Arabic. By the next morning, his name is moving across the world. Not because of a report he filed, but because he has become the story. This is how Gaza's journalists became the last witnesses to a war they were also trying to survive. For almost 2 years, Gaza had been a place where the normal rules of foreign reporting did not apply. International journalists could not freely enter the Strip to report on their own. Some were allowed in only under Israeli military escort. Most were kept out entirely. That left the job to Palestinian journalists already inside Gaza. They were reporters, camera operators, fixers, photographers, producers, translators, drivers, and sometimes the only people with a working phone, a charged battery, and enough signal to send one more image out. They did not cover Gaza from a press hotel. They covered it from tents, from hospital courtyards, from broken streets, from rooms where their own families were sleeping nearby. They filmed bombardments that could also kill them. They interviewed displaced people while being displaced themselves. They reported on hunger while standing in the same food lines. The world kept watching Gaza through their phones. al-Sharif became one of those faces. He reported mainly from northern Gaza. He was known to viewers who followed the war through Al Jazeera Arabic. His reports were often direct. A street, a blast, a hospital, a crowd, a voice trying to stay steady while the scene behind him was not. According to Reuters, he had also been part of a Reuters team that won a Pulitzer Prize in 2024 for breaking news photography from the Israel-Hamas war. That made his work visible far beyond one newsroom. But visibility in Gaza had become dangerous. By mid-2025, press freedom groups were not just counting journalists killed in the war. They were warning about something else, a pattern. The more certain journalists became known, the more often they were accused. Israeli officials had repeatedly alleged that some Palestinian journalists were linked to Hamas or Islamic Jihad. Al Jazeera rejected such claims against its staff. CPJ said Israel had failed to provide evidence in several cases. Israel denied deliberately targeting journalists. It said some people killed in strikes were members of militant groups working under the cover of the press. That is the central conflict in this story. Not just between two armies, between two versions of what a camera means. To Israel, some cameras in Gaza were not neutral. Some belonged, according to its claims, to operatives or propagandists. To press freedom organizations, those same claims looked like a dangerous tool, a way to place a target on people who were already standing in the open. And to the journalists inside Gaza, the accusation itself could feel like a warning. On July 24, 2025, the Committee to Protect Journalists published a statement about al-Sharif. It said it was gravely worried about his safety. CPJ said an Israeli military spokesperson had stepped up online attacks against him. The statement described the accusations as unfounded and said the danger to his life was acute. Al-Sharif told CPJ that the campaign was not only a media threat or image destruction. He called it a real-life threat. This was less than 3 weeks before he was killed. To understand why this mattered, you have to understand the media blackout around Gaza. Since the beginning of the war, after the Hamas-led attack on Israel on October 7, 2023, Gaza became one of the hardest places in the world for outside reporters to enter. Israel controlled access through its border crossings. Egypt controlled another route through Rafah, but that route was also limited and later severely restricted by the war. Foreign reporters repeatedly asked for independent access. Media organizations called for it. Press freedom groups filed legal challenges. The answer, in practice, remained mostly no. So the international press depended on local journalists, the same journalists who could not leave. A foreign correspondent can sometimes rotate out of a war zone. A local journalist often cannot. In Gaza, this meant the people gathering the news were also living inside the catastrophe they were describing. Their children were hungry, their homes might be gone, their relatives might be dead, their newsroom might be a backpack, their office might be a tent beside a hospital, and if they were injured, there might not be a safe hospital left to treat them. By July 2025, starvation was becoming part of the story. Reuters, AFP, the Associated Press, and BBC News issued a joint statement. They said they were desperately concerned for their journalists in Gaza, who were increasingly unable to feed themselves and their families. They called them the world's eyes and ears on the ground. They urged Israeli authorities to allow journalists in and out of Gaza and ensure that adequate food supplies reached the people there. This was not a small newsroom asking for sympathy. These were 4 of the largest international news organizations on Earth. They were saying their own reporters might not have enough food to keep working. A few days earlier, AFP's Journalists Association had warned that it could not recall seeing a colleague die of hunger in the agency's history. AFP was founded in 1944. It had lost journalists in conflicts. It had seen wounded and imprisoned staff. But this was different. The fear was not only a missile. It was the slow collapse of the body doing the reporting. UNRWA, the United Nations Agency for Palestinian Refugees, said its staff, doctors, nurses, journalists, and humanitarian workers were hungry. Its Commissioner General said many were fainting from hunger and exhaustion while trying to do their jobs. Reuters reported the statement in late July 2025. That meant a journalist could wake up with a professional task and a basic physical problem. Get to the scene, file the video, find an internet connection, find food, maybe fail at the last part. This is one of the reasons Gaza's journalism became so difficult to categorize. It was not only war reporting, it was self-documentation under siege. A reporter could film a family looking for bread, then go home, and realize there was no bread for his own family. A camera operator could film people carrying bodies, then carry the body of another camera operator later that day. A correspondent could say, "The wounded are arriving," while knowing that if he were wounded, the same hospital might have no space for him. And still, reports kept coming out. The system depended on a fragile chain. A journalist had to survive the strike. The camera had to survive the dust. A battery had to be charged. A network had to work. A file had to upload. An editor outside Gaza had to verify what could be verified. Then a viewer in London, Cairo, New York, Doha, Paris, or Berlin would see 10 seconds of footage and call it news. But the people making it were not separate from the 10 seconds. The danger to journalists in Gaza was not theoretical. CPJ, RSF, UNESCO, Reuters, Al Jazeera, and others tracked deaths across the war. The exact counts varied by organization, by definition, and by date. Some counted only confirmed journalists. Some included media workers. Some separately classified killings they believed were targeted. But the trend was not disputed. Gaza had become the deadliest place in the world for journalists. RSF said more than 220 reporters had been killed in Gaza by the Israeli army since October 7, 2023, including at least 70 likely killed because of their work. CPJ said the Israel-Gaza war was the deadliest period for journalists since it began collecting data in 1992. Numbers like this can become abstract. More than 190, more than 220, nearly 240. Each group has methodology. Each update changes the total, but the reality on the ground was simpler. Gaza's press corps was shrinking. Every death meant one fewer person who knew a street, a family, a dialect, a hospital entrance, a shortcut, a source, a signal point, a way to get a file out. By August 2025, al-Sharif was not only reporting a war, he was reporting in a professional environment where being known could be fatal. Being unknown could make verification harder, and leaving was mostly impossible. On the evening of August 10th, he posted on X about intense bombardment in Gaza City. Reuters reported that the post came minutes before his death. Al Jazeera reported that in his last video, loud explosions could be heard in the background, and the night sky lit up orange. The precise sequence of his last minutes can only be reconstructed from the posts, videos, statements, and reports that survived, but the broad outline is known. The strike hit a tent near al-Shifa hospital. According to Reuters, Al Jazeera said al-Sharif was killed alongside Mohammed Qureike, Ibrahim Zaher, and Mohammed Nufal. A local freelance journalist, Mohammed al-Khaldi, was also reported killed. Al Jazeera also named freelance cameraman Momin Aliwa among those killed. The reporting on the exact affiliations and counts shifted in the first hours, as often happens after strikes, but the result was clear. A group of journalists had been killed in one attack. Israel said it had targeted al-Sharif. It alleged he led a Hamas cell and was involved in rocket attacks. Reuters reported that the Israeli military cited intelligence and documents it said were discovered in Gaza, but did not disclose them in that statement. Israeli spokesperson Avichai Adrai posted undated images that appeared to show al-Sharif with Hamas officials. Reuters said it could not verify their authenticity, and it was not clear when they were taken or how the military obtained them. Al Jazeera rejected Israel's claim. CPJ said Israel had failed to provide evidence to back up its allegations. A UN expert had previously said claims against al-Sharif were unsubstantiated. Al-Sharif himself had denied Israeli accusations before his death. This is the point where language matters. Israel said he was a militant. Al Jazeera said he was a journalist. CPJ said the evidence was not provided. Reuters could not verify the images. The facts that can be stated with confidence are narrower than the claims around them. Anas al-Sharif was a journalist. Israel killed him in a strike. Israel alleged militant ties. Those claims were disputed by Al Jazeera and press freedom groups. Publicly available evidence did not settle the allegation. But the strike did something no allegation could undo. It removed one of Gaza's most visible reporters. The reaction was immediate. Al Jazeera called the attack an attempt to silence voices. CPJ described it as Israel's deadliest single attack on journalists in the war. Reuters reported condemnation from rights groups and journalists. The UN Human Rights Office condemned the killings and said the actions represented a grave breach of international humanitarian law. Israel denied targeting journalists as journalists. The same loop began again. Accusation, denial, condemnation, demand for evidence. Another name added to the list. For viewers outside Gaza, this can feel repetitive. A journalist is killed. A military says he was not simply a journalist. A network says he was. A press group demands proof. The news cycle moves. Another strike happens. Another name is learned too late. But inside the pattern, the risk accumulates. If a journalist can be accused before being killed, and if the evidence remains disputed afterward, then every remaining reporter has to ask a private question. Am I next? Not because they know what a court would find, but because there may never be a court before the missile. That fear was not imaginary to al-Sharif. CPJ recorded his own warning in July. He said he felt he could be bombed at any moment. He said his family was also in danger. CPJ reported that his father had been killed in December 2023 in an Israeli airstrike on their family home, after al-Sharif had received threats telling him to stop covering northern Gaza and leave. This is not a normal professional pressure. It is not a complaint email. It is the possibility that a reporter's work, family, and survival have collapsed into one target area. The killing of al-Sharif also came after months of international concern about Israel's treatment of Al Jazeera. Israel had banned Al Jazeera from operating inside the country. It had accused the network of harming national security. Al Jazeera rejected the accusations and continued relying on its Gaza team. In Gaza, the network's journalists became among the most visible reporters of the war. Visibility made their work more powerful. It also made them easier to identify. There is a reason authoritarian governments, militaries, militias, and armed groups often care so much about cameras. Cameras turn events into evidence. Not perfect evidence, not complete evidence, but evidence that can travel. A destroyed building can be described by officials. A video can show the building. A civilian death can be denied or framed. A photo can make denial harder. A famine can be argued about. A reporter crying on air while describing hunger can make the argument feel different. This is why journalism in war is both protected and threatened. Under international humanitarian law, journalists working in armed conflict are civilians unless they take a direct part in hostilities. But that protection depends on more than text. It depends on armed forces recognizing it. It depends on investigations after violations. It depends on consequences. Without consequences, the protection becomes a sentence people quote after the funeral. And Gaza had very little space for consequences. The physical geography made reporting even more dangerous. Gaza is small, densely populated, heavily damaged, and under constant movement orders during major operations. Journalists did not move through a normal city. They moved through checkpoints, destroyed roads, rubble, crowds, and areas that could become targets without warning. Hospitals became media hubs because they had wounded, officials, electricity when available, and relative visibility. But hospitals were also attacked. In August 2025, Reuters and other outlets reported that strikes on Nasser Hospital in southern Gaza killed journalists working for Reuters, the Associated Press, Al Jazeera, and others. The message to remaining reporters was not subtle. Even places where journalists gathered were not safe. There were other pressures too. Gaza is governed by Hamas, and reporting under Hamas has never been free of risk. Press freedom groups have also documented threats and restrictions from Palestinian authorities and armed groups. That matters. A journalist in Gaza could face danger from Israeli strikes, suspicion from armed factions, pressure from political actors, public anger, hunger, displacement, and the ordinary chaos of a collapsing place. The camera did not protect them from any of it. But the largest and deadliest threat during the war came from the military campaign itself. Airstrikes destroyed media offices, homes, vehicles, and tents. Telecommunications outages cut reporters off from editors. Fuel shortages made movement and transmission harder. Food shortages weakened the people expected to keep filming. A journalist might survive a strike but lose the ability to work because a generator stopped, a phone died, or the internet disappeared. This is the hidden machinery of silence. It is not always a sensor with a stamp. Sometimes it is a dead battery. Sometimes it is a missing charger. Sometimes it is a reporter too hungry to stand. Sometimes it is the only camera operator in a neighborhood being killed. The international media had a problem. It needed Gaza's local reporters. It knew they were in extreme danger, but it could not easily replace them, evacuate them, or protect them. AFP, Reuters, AP, and BBC could issue statements. Press groups could file complaints. Editors could call officials. But the people holding the cameras remained in Gaza. Reuters Institute described AFP's struggle to protect its Gaza reporters. AFP worked with freelancers in the Strip. Freelancers are often the backbone of conflict reporting, especially where staff correspondents cannot go. They know the area. They can move faster. They often accept risks that larger institutions would not assign to staff. But this also creates a moral problem. A global news organization can publish a freelancer's work, depend on it, and still have limited power to get that freelancer out. By late July 2025, AFP was warning that its contributors faced extreme food shortages. The concern was not theoretical. International media managers were looking at the people who made their coverage possible and realizing those people might die not only from bombs but from starvation. The world's information supply from Gaza was resting on people whose own bodies were failing. The story of Gaza's journalists is therefore not just about death. It is about extraction. News is extracted from a place that its reporters cannot escape. A clip leaves. The person who filmed it stays. A photograph appears on front pages. The photographer looks for food. A report enters the archive. The reporter moves to another tent. In most wars, a correspondent files and then steps away. In Gaza, stepping away often meant only turning the camera toward your own street. Anas al-Sharif's death became a symbol partly because it combined all these forces. He was visible. He had been warned about. He had been accused. He had denied the claims. CPJ had called for his protection. He had reported on hunger. He posted about bombardment minutes before he was killed. Then Israel said it had targeted him as a militant. Al Jazeera and press freedom groups rejected the claim. The evidence was disputed, and the remaining journalists had to keep working. There is also the question of audience. For months, viewers around the world consumed Gaza through fragments. A child covered in dust, a doctor shouting in a hallway, a drone shot of tents, a reporter in a helmet saying the connection might cut. The fragments created outrage, fatigue, disbelief, arguments, and denial. Some viewers demanded more proof. Others said they had seen enough. But almost none of them had to ask how the proof was being produced. Every image had a path. Someone had to stand there. Someone had to point the lens. Someone had to decide whether filming was worth the risk. Someone had to upload it through a damaged network. Someone had to attach a name, a time, a location. The image did not float out of Gaza by itself. This matters because the death of journalists changes the record. It does not only change staffing, it changes history. Wars are later reconstructed from what was documented. Court cases depend on footage, testimony, metadata, and contemporaneous reporting. Human rights investigations depend on witnesses. Families depend on names. Without journalists, the archive thins. The powerful get more room to narrate events without contradiction. That is why the phrase, eyes and ears, keeps appearing. Reuters, AFP, AP, and BBC used it in their joint statement. It sounds simple, but in Gaza it was literal. If foreign journalists could not enter, and local journalists were killed, starved, displaced, or discredited, then the world's eyes and ears were not metaphorically closing. They were being removed one by one. Israel has argued that Hamas embeds itself within civilian infrastructure, uses civilian areas for military purposes, and exploits the presence of media. Those claims are central to Israel's justification for many operations in Gaza. Hamas denies many such allegations. The presence of Hamas in Gaza is real. The difficulty of distinguishing civilians from fighters in an urban war is real. The danger of propaganda is real. But none of that removes the requirement to prove claims against specific journalists, especially after lethal force is used. That is the hard part. War produces uncertainty. International law demands distinction. Propaganda exploits confusion. Journalism tries to document through it. And the people doing the documenting can be accused of being part of the thing they are documenting. The case of al-Sharif shows the consequences of that fog. If Israel had evidence that he was directly participating in hostilities, it could present it. If the evidence is withheld, disputed, or unverifiable, outside observers are left with a dead journalist and an allegation. For press freedom groups, that is not enough. For Israel, intelligence may not be something it wants to reveal. For the family of the dead, the distinction may arrive too late to matter. This gap between intelligence claims and public proof is where much of the anger lives. It is not unique to Gaza. States often cite classified intelligence after strikes. Armed groups often deny affiliations after deaths. Media organizations often defend their staff. Human rights groups ask for independent investigations. But Gaza made the problem extreme because independent access was so limited. The fewer outside observers are allowed in, the more the world depends on local journalists. The more local journalists are killed or accused, the fewer independent witnesses remain. The system eats itself. After al-Sharif was killed, funerals were held. Colleagues mourned. Images circulated of press vests, bodies, and crowds. Al Jazeera played messages. Press organizations updated their counts. The story moved through global media. Then Gaza continued. That is the part that often disappears. A killing that shocks the world for one day becomes a working condition the next morning. The remaining journalists still had to cover bombardments, displacement, aid lines, hospital strikes, funerals, and accusations. They had to cover the deaths of people they knew. They had to decide whether to stand in front of a camera after seeing what visibility had done to Anas. Some continued because there was no one else. Some continued because stopping would mean the story vanished. Some continued because journalism had become tied to survival in a different way. If the world could see, maybe something would change. If the world could not see, then Gaza would become only a battlefield described by the people bombing it and the people ruling parts of it. There is a grim irony here. The more dangerous Gaza became for journalists, the more necessary their work became. Every strike made documentation urgent. Every killed journalist made documentation rarer. Every restriction on access made the remaining reporters more important. Every accusation against them made their protection harder. This is how a press corps is squeezed, not by one action, by layers. Bar foreign reporters. Destroy infrastructure. Displace local reporters. Let hunger weaken them. Accuse the most visible ones. Kill some. Deny targeting journalists. Demand the world trust intelligence it cannot see. Then repeat. Not every death has the same facts. Not every claim can be resolved from outside. Not every journalist killed was necessarily killed because of journalism. But the scale makes individual ambiguity part of a larger picture. When so many journalists die in one conflict, the burden of explanation becomes heavier, not lighter. And the burden has not been met. The Israeli government says it does not target journalists. Press freedom groups say the record shows otherwise. CPJ has classified some cases as murders, meaning deliberate killings of journalists for their work. RSF has filed complaints at the International Criminal Court. UNESCO has condemned killings. Reuters, AP, AFP, BBC, and others have demanded access and protection. Israel has rejected many accusations and continued to frame some journalists as militants. The dead cannot answer. That leaves documents, footage, posts, witness statements, metadata, and the institutions that preserve them. It leaves the last messages written in case of death. Al Jazeera said al-Sharif had prepared a final message months before he was killed. Reuters reported part of it. He wrote that he had not hesitated to convey the truth as it is. It is difficult to use a line like that without turning it into myth. But it also matters because journalists in Gaza were increasingly forced to think of their work as something that might outlive them. A final message is not normal journalism. It is testimony, written under expectation of being killed. This expectation changes everything. Imagine reporting with a death statement already drafted.
Imagine knowing that your next post
might be read as evidence, propaganda, farewell, or target marker. Imagine understanding that your press vest identifies you to viewers and to whoever is watching the feed from above. The vest is supposed to say civilian. In Gaza, it could also say visible. The camera becomes both shield and signal. The word press becomes both protection and exposure. The world often asks journalists in war zones to be brave, but bravery is a convenient word for people watching from safety. It turns structural failure into personal virtue. A brave journalist still needs food. A brave journalist still needs evacuation routes. A brave journalist still needs international law to mean something before death, not only after it. A brave journalist should not have to become famous enough for the world to mourn him, but not protected enough for the world to save him. That is the uncomfortable center of this story. The international system praised Gaza's journalists while failing to secure their basic survival. It relied on their work while watching them starve. It cited their footage while debating whether they could leave. It condemned their deaths while the list kept growing. There were calls for foreign media access. If outside reporters could enter independently, the burden on local journalists would not disappear, but it would change. More witnesses would mean more cross-checking. More institutions on the ground would mean less total dependence on people trapped inside. It would also make it harder for any party to dominate the narrative. But access remained restricted. Israel argued that the security environment made access difficult and dangerous. Press groups argued that danger is not a sufficient reason to impose a near-total media blackout. especially when the same blackout makes local journalists carry nearly all the risk. Both things can be true in part. Gaza is dangerous, and preventing independent access changes what the world can know. In war, control of access is control of knowledge. This is why the death of al-Sharif was not only the death of one correspondent, it was a test of whether the world would accept a system where the only people able to report freely from a war zone could be trapped, hungry, accused, and killed, while outsiders debated the wording. The answer so far is unclear. By 2026, RSF still described Palestine as the most dangerous place in the world for journalists. It said journalists in Gaza lacked shelter, food, and water. CPJ continued challenging restrictions on international access. Media groups continued calling for protection. Gaza's journalists continued working under conditions that would shut down most newsrooms in a day. The story did not end with al-Sharif. It did not end with one tent, one strike, or one statement. The mechanism remains. A place is sealed. Local reporters become indispensable. Their work becomes evidence. Their evidence becomes threatening. Their names become known. Their names become vulnerable. And then the world waits for the next post. There is one final detail. Shortly before he was killed, al-Sharif posted that Gaza City was under intense bombardment. It was the kind of update that had become almost routine. A short message from a place where messages often arrived between explosions. To most viewers, it was another alert. To him, it was the last one. That is the problem with watching a war through the eyes of people inside it. You do not always know when you are seeing the last thing they will ever send. Gaza's remaining journalists still pick up their cameras. They still stand near hospitals. They still film the sky. They still try to make the world look. But each time a name disappears from the press list, the same question gets harder to avoid. Who is left to witness Gaza?